Hey, DawgNation, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. What a great, great day it is here on this Monday. Getting closer to the start of spring practice, fun conversation coming up on our program. We'll say hello to Chip Towers a bit later on. Chip's been doing a great job at DawgNation.com looking at these key position battles that are going to really set the narrative for Georgia this spring. Can't wait for G-Day. Chip's work gets me even more excited about it. We'll talk to him about that coming up in just a couple of minutes. I want to begin the show today by talking about Jake Fromm and this possibility that looms out there on the horizon, and it may be more real than some Georgia fans want to consider when it comes to Fromm. In fact, let's begin with that. I also want to get into what another national writer has said about Georgia, and one of the things that makes G-Day and spring practice for Georgia interesting to people outside the bubble of DawgNation. We'll have some fun with that, and we'll get back to our ways of giving away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt on the program today, too. So that's all coming up. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I hope you get a chance to see Friday's show. We're listening to Friday's show, however you consume it. I hope you get a chance to do the whole thing, because late on Friday, we had what I thought was a real treat. A chance to talk to the legendary former Georgia quarterback David Gran. Now, I always love talking to David on this program because David has unique insight, given the fact that he played the quarterback position. And he played at a really high level, huge stats, great success, SEC championship and everything else. Had there been a playoff in the early 2000s, David likely would have led Georgia to it, at least at one point in time. David is just he's one of those guys that has traveled down the road as well as any college quarterback can. So when David talks about college quarterbacks, our own Jake Fromm included, I'm always particularly interested in what he had to say. And he said something about Jake on Friday that I thought was really interesting. Now, I'm going to play this for you as a way of kind of going back, but what its purpose is to set us up to talk about something with Jake Fromm today that I don't think can be denied. And Georgia fans need to pay very close attention to what other people are saying about Jake Fromm as he heads towards his junior season here this 2019 fall. But to set all this up, here is David Gran reminding us, time passes quickly, and Georgia fans need to pause and appreciate just how good Fromm's already been and likely how good he could be moving into 2019. Here is David Gran on Jake Fromm.
It's amazing, Brandon, how fast things change. Yeah, it used to be, I mean, heck, even when I was playing this 15 years ago, guys would come in, they typically redshirt a year and kind of get familiar with the offense and the whole deal and the speed of the game. I mean, now guys are coming in, they're ready to play, they're ready to make a difference. And you just, amazing how fast things are changing. Justin Fields comes in, then he's back out, and chances that he's going to be starting at Ohio State. It's such a fast pace. The game's changed dramatically. Georgia fans, we got to pinch ourselves. I mean, it's pretty amazing what Fromm has been able to do since he's been our quarterback. I mean, taking us to the national championship as a true freshman, and just really the way he's handled himself and represented himself in the school at the quarterback position. Well, we've been pretty fortunate because he's been a consistent player for us.
You mentioned back in the year 2000, Jim Donovan's last year. We'll pull out of that. But yeah, that's really good stuff from David Gran there, talking about Jake Fromm and just how quickly all this comes about and how all that goes, and that's really fascinating stuff. And I don't want to sound like Grandpa BA here, but I think what David says is really true. It's amazing how fast the Fromm era seems to be going by. I mean, if you want to go back to some of the early days of DawgNation, back when we were just a podcast, and I was doing it from a closet in my house, and Jeff Sintel would come on the phone back then, and he'd be, saying, BA, you got to wait till you see this young man from Warner Robins from Houston County. Wait till you see Jake Fromm when he gets to Georgia, and he'd tell the stories that have now become cliched and tired, but back then weren't quite so cliche and tired, about how he had been a hero in the Little League World Series and how he had hit a home run in his final at bat, I guess, of his high school baseball career to lead Houston County to a state championship, and how he had that winning gene. Wait till you see him in Athens, Jeff Sintel would say. Well, we've been seeing him in Athens now for the last couple of years, and no doubt we've all been impressed. And now when you move towards that next season, the junior season, as David and I were talking about on Friday in the program, hard to believe it might already be time to start talking about the end of the Jake Fromm era. But in a way, 2019, let's face it, the evidence that we're getting from outside the bubble of DawgNation, the conversation we have around here every single day, the evidence that we're getting is this indeed could be Jake Fromm's last year. And no matter how many people sort of want to assume that, nah, Fromm's probably going to be a 4-year guy, and he probably won't leave after his junior season, he probably won't do that. That's not the way that he's being treated by media, scouts, other experts. They continue to treat Jake Fromm as if he will be a junior that departs college early to go be a first-round draft pick in the NFL. Let me give you the latest example of this. I thought that Adam Rittenberg from ESPN had a really interesting piece about I guess you call it a symposium of top draft picks, potential top draft picks, that were in Indianapolis last week for the NFL Scouting Combine. And they were kept away from the watchful eye of the media. Most people wouldn't have known they were there. But Jake Fromm was a part of this group, including Tua Tagovailoa, I guess, according to Rittenberg, was there. Andrew Thomas, also from Georgia, was there. That's no big surprise. He's likely to be a very high first-round pick. Jonathan Taylor, the running back from Wisconsin. A couple Clemson guys, Travis Etienne and Isaiah Simmons. Grant Delpit, the really good safety from LSU. And I love the description of why they are there. Let me show you this on the screen if you're watching on video. This is how Rittenberg sums all this up. He says the symposiums are invitation only. In football, NCAA staff researches players entering their 3rd or 4th seasons, listen to this phrase now, who are projected as top draft selections the following year. So if you don't hear anything else that I'm saying right now, hear this. According to one of ESPN's top college football writers, and according to a NCAA staff researcher, right now Jake Fromm is in the group considered to be a top draft selection the following year. Folks, if you're a quarterback and you're going to be a top selection, for the most part, you're not sticking around school. Now, there are the occasional examples, I guess, where this happens. Andrew Luck, I guess, did this, and maybe there are other examples too. But for the most part, if you're a junior quarterback, you are told you're going in the first round. That is when you leave school and you move on to the first round. So, folks, enjoy Jake Fromm apparently in 2019 because that may be the last chance you get to see him in a Georgia uniform. Now, this is also a conversation that we've had in part with other experts here on DawgNation Daily over the last couple of months, including a guy that knows Fromm very well, knows the quarterback position really well, too. Trent Dilfer is the head coach, so to speak, of the Elite 11 quarterback camp. He evaluates quarterbacks for a living. He kind of talks quarterbacks for a living. We bumped into him back during the Super Bowl week when the entire football world had descended upon Atlanta, and I asked him at the time, do you see this in Jake Fromm's future? Do you think that he will leave Georgia after his junior season? And maybe more importantly than that, what will he need to do to be ready to make that move? And Dilfer gave a strong response. Here's Trent Dilfer.
I think he needs to be a little more athletic at the position. He needs to improve in the pocket, needs to improve his movement patterns. He's got the arm, he's got the brain, he's got the toughness, he's got the leadership. Needs to step it up a little bit athletically, and at that age you can still improve athletically. So we'll see what this next year has for him, but for me, my emphasis if I was coaching him would be show a little more dynamic qualities as an athlete.
So I think it's really interesting that Dilfer gives a pretty honest, I think, assessment and a pretty thorough description of what you want to see from Jake Fromm if he indeed were to leave school after the season. But let's face it, that could happen. Look at the improvement he showed in 2018 compared to 2017. And look how quickly he readied himself in that first year of 2017 as a freshman to become Georgia's starting quarterback after Jacob Eason got injured. We have seen stair steps of progression thus far through Jake Fromm's career. It's reasonable to assume he'll take the next step in 2019, and it could be one that puts him on the doorstep of being drafted as a junior exiting school early to go to the NFL draft. So for 2019, Fromm's your guy. Maybe he leads Georgia to a national championship. But concurrent to that, you've also got to start thinking about what's going to happen once Jake Fromm does leave. Because let's face it, Georgia's not in this business to win one national championship. Georgia's trying to be in this business to win multiple national championships and build something at Georgia that could potentially feel like a dynasty, something that could last for a really long time. That means the quarterback after Jake Fromm really matters. Is that guy currently on this roster? Well, Dwan Mathis, the incoming freshman, wants to be that guy, and he certainly seems to have the right attitude about all of this. I think he's using his opportunity now to sit and watch and learn from Jake Fromm as a real asset in his development. In fact, when Mike Griffith went up to Michigan to speak to Mathis, Mathis made that very clear, that a chance to sit and learn from a quarterback that's already established and proven so much in the competition for the next Jake Fromm, Dwan Mathis says he wants to use that to his advantage. Here is the incoming Georgia freshman.
Really, I'm just coming in to work and put my head down and do what I'm supposed to do. I'm not coming in to – of course I'm going to compete, but I'm not coming in to just try to push Jake Fromm out the way and take his job, because of course the chances of that happening are very low. He as soon as he came in, he went straight to the national championship and played for a national championship. A game that a lot of people thought they were going to win to the very end, came down to the last wire. But really, when I come in, I'm just coming in to work hard and do what I'm supposed to do and learn what I can from Jake Fromm and see where that can take me.
So that attitude, I believe, will serve Mathis well both this season, what's likely to be a season of learning, and then in 2020 when he could be a part of that competition. And presumably one of the guys that he'll be in that competition with for 2020 is the recent Georgia commit, Carson Beck. Now, Beck committed to Georgia in a bit of a whirlwind. His recruitment has been contested, probably will continue to be so up to the point where he signs. But if we assume for a moment that Beck sticks with his UGA commitment, and there's no reason to think right now that he won't, Beck will be one of the guys that Mathis is competing with. And when Carson Beck spoke to First Coast News down near Jacksonville, where Beck lives, the other day, in one of the first wide-ranging interviews we've heard from Beck since he committed to Georgia, Beck also talked about the notion of quarterback competition. Well, guess what? If Fromm leaves after the 2019 season, then Beck's ability to step in and compete right away will be really important. And he made it very clear to the TV interviewer the other day that competing is exactly something that he expects to do, and he's not going to shy away from a quarterback competition at Georgia or any of the other schools that he might have considered. Here's Carson Beck.
I mean, truly, to me, I really didn't care who was in the quarterback room because, I mean, let's say, for example, I'm just going to use Michigan as an example. Okay. So say that they have a full quarterback room, but they're the number one team in the country. They have everybody, and I have a good chance of beating out those quarterbacks. Like, I'm going to go there. But I feel like that was the same with Florida, and then obviously Georgia had, I mean, just like you said, Justin Fields transferred. Jake Fromm could have a possibility of leaving, but if he comes back his senior year, I redshirt and learn behind someone that's been a 4-year starter. So I feel like it definitely played a little effect in it, but at the end of the day, I mean, I just chose the best fit for me.
All right, so I think that's really interesting from Carson Beck, that he's not afraid of the competition. He's ready to step in, and he kind of says, hey, listen, if Fromm's still here, I'll learn from him. If not, I'll try to step in place of him. I like that from Beck. The overall bottom line for me, though, is two distinct points. The first point is, if Jake Fromm does truly play well enough this year to put himself in the conversation for the first round of the NFL draft next spring, that's almost certainly a good thing for Georgia, because he'll probably lift the entire fortunes of the program along his way to doing that. But while Fromm is succeeding in that way, Georgia's got to be thinking about what's next, and Georgia fans ought to be paying a little bit of attention to what's next. Is it already in the roster with DeJuan Mathis? Is it about to show up in Carson Beck? Is it, well, who is it, and how will it all fit in? That's a really important question as 2019 turns into 2020. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today on the DawgNation Facebook page, the YouTube page, the DawgNation Twitter feed. A lot of different ways to access our program on video. We appreciate you doing that. We love our friends on the radio in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we love the podcast. A lot of different ways to catch up with the podcast, too. Apple Podcast Player, the Android devices, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just a lot of opportunities. We just appreciate you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We're going to get Chip Towers coming up in just a moment, and I'll talk to Chip about some of the issues with Fromm and maybe what's next for Georgia, the quarterback position. We'll look forward to doing that with him coming up in a couple of minutes. Let me also remind you, as we head towards St. Patrick's Day, many of you love celebrating that. Well, a great way to celebrate that is with our friends at Kroger. They've got you covered for St. Patrick's Day savings on a lot of those authentic items to make your St. Patrick's Day meal party go the way it's supposed to. Corned beef brisket, cabbage, potatoes. It's the perfect St. Patrick's Day dinner, and you can get great savings and recipes at Kroger. Go to this website right here, Kroger.com/what's-for-dinner. Kroger.com/what's-for-dinner. You can find out a lot more about that. All right, before we get Chip Towers, and we'll do a lot of spring preview stuff with Chip in a moment, let me also talk about what somebody else has recently said about Georgia as it gets ready to begin its spring practice. We'll probably do some of this now, and then we'll do some of this a little bit later on in the show, too. Bill Bender, friend of our program, been on DawgNation Daily a number of times, writing for the Sporting News, has said that he believes that the Georgia G-Day game is going to be one of college football's most anticipated spring games, and he kind of gives the reason for that. If you're watching on video, I'll show you this on the screen. And what I think is interesting about what Bill writes is it's very similar to a lot of what we've talked about on DawgNation Daily recently, the importance of the wide receiver position. Bill says it this way. He says, we know Jake Fromm is a stable of running backs, but who is he throwing to? 5 of the top 6 leading receivers from last year are gone, and Jeremiah Holloman is the top target on the roster. Senior Tyler Simmons will take on a more pronounced role, and Charlie Werner is the top returning tight end. This is an opportunity for the Bulldogs' young receivers to show out. That's Bill Bennett from the Sporting News, and I think that Bill's right about that. I think that one of the most interesting and fun things about G-Day is seeing who does show up. Now, if you're watching a video, you see J.J. Holloman right there on your screen. He was a G-Day star a couple of years ago, and then last season on the field kind of showed more evidence of what the promise he initially showed on G-Day. But if you're coming into Sanford Stadium, and no doubt there'll be a huge crowd there once again to watch all of that, seeing how those receivers perform, I think is going to be as much fun and as interesting as anything possibly could be. And to add to this for a moment, Mike Griffith last week when he was in Indianapolis for the scouting combine, he talked to a number of former Georgia wide receivers, guys who were there, Riley Ridley, Terry Godwin, McCole Hardman, and asked them, along with Bill Bender's line of thinking of which receiver is going to step up and show out. Well, Mike asked a lot of former Georgia receivers that too. You can read the piece at DawgNation.com. But let me give you an example of what a few of those guys thought. Riley Ridley on that question. You read this at DawgNation. He says, I'm going to bet on J.J. Holloman, and I'm going to bet on Tyler Simmons, and here's Matt Lander's name coming up from Riley Ridley. I think that's really interesting. Another Georgia receiver, McCole Hardman, says, a guy that comes to mind is also Matt Landers. He says if he gets his head right and gets that playbook down, he'll have his name called on a lot of Saturdays. McCole goes on to say, of course, J.J. Holloman is going to be the leader of that room. I expect great things from him, and I expect Tyler Simmons to do some things. That's McCole Hardman speaking about all of this. Then one more Georgia receiver who stepped in and talked about this a bit was Terry Godwin, who also says Matt Landers. So by my count, all 3 of these former Georgia wide receivers all mention Matt Landers as a possible to step up. And then Godwin also mentions Kearis Jackson and Tommy Bush, who's always a very popular player in our comment section. Terry goes on to say that there'll be quite a few back there. I'm pretty sure they will show out this year. So I think it's really interesting stuff from Riley Ridley, McCole Hardman, and Terry Godwin on the subject of which wide receivers will step up for Georgia. Now, later on the program, I'm going to go back in time a bit to let you hear what Mike Griffith had to say about what these Georgia wide receivers did not mention when it comes to a wide receiver stepping up. And I think Mike's point on this is kind of an interesting one. We'll kind of hear that. And Kirby Smart will also remind us, too, about what really matters as this wide receiver competition intensifies. So we'll do more of this on the topic later on today here on DawgNation Daily. I'll also give away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt, too. But I do think it's interesting that the national media there, very similar to what we've been saying on DawgNation Daily for quite some time, that wide receiver competition, one of the most interesting and one of the most fun as the Dogs head towards spring. Speaking of spring practice, for more on that and what we can expect on G-Day coming up on April 20th, let's talk to a guy who's done a good job chronicling all of this for DawgNation. It's our buddy Chip Towers right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I want to welcome back Chip Towers to DawgNation Daily, and as I said to our audience before Chip joined us, he has had some really fun spring previews up at DawgNation.com, really thorough analysis, and stuff like this just gets me excited. I love spring football because it's as close as we're going to get to real football before late August, early September, so I'll take what I can get, and spring football offers you a little bit of that. And Chip, I do want to talk to you about a good bit of these spring previews. If you don't mind, as I say good morning to you, let me also let you weigh in on a topic that I addressed before you joined us. When you look, Chip, at Adam Rittenberg's piece over the weekend or late last week from ESPN.com about Jake Fromm being with Tua Tagovailoa and some Andrew Thomas and some others at the NFL Scouting Combine last week as selected by the NCAA to learn what that process is about, there's really no other way to take this other than what mock drafts have been telling us and NFL draft media has been telling us, that right now Jake Fromm is being treated as a quarterback that could leave Georgia after his junior season. Now, Trent Dilfer's told us that Fromm still has some things to work on, but let's face it, he could work on those things and make another big step towards improvement the way that he did in 2018. How realistic do you think this could be that Jake Fromm is playing his final football games for Georgia in 2019?
I think it'll be determined in the 2019 season. I mean, I don't think Jake Fromm can sit here today and tell you with any strong conviction that he plans to be back or he plans to go after his junior season. That'll be determined with how things go on the field, and that's the good thing about it. As long as Jake Fromm remains healthy, he'll be given every opportunity to play himself into one of the elite draft positions at quarterback, because Georgia's going to enter the season as a top 5 team. They're going to enter the season as an Eastern Division favorite, and they're going to enter the season as one of the favorite teams to reach the college football playoff. If Jake Fromm is able to pull all that off, and let's face it, there's no question about he's going to be the man as long as he's healthy. I think that'll put him in prime position to be drafted in the first round. And as you know, nowadays, I mean, if you command first round money, if you command first round position, it's really financially wise to make that jump. So I don't think any of that's determined right now. But you know Jake Fromm like I do. Everybody out there knows Jake Fromm. It's spring break. That means, where is he, at the beach? No, he's at this quarterback camp that he attends every year, out in Mississippi, and working on his game.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling he'll be ready to go by the time the first game rolls around, and then we'll see what happens.
So obviously, the last thing I want to do is push Jake Fromm out the door. But as I told our audience before you joined us, Chip, concurrent to celebrating, enjoying Fromm this season, what he might be able to lead Georgia to, it is a really important question to start thinking about what's next after Fromm. Now, if Justin Fields was still here, that would be an easy question to answer. Fields would step in and he'd emerge in the starting role. But now it's looking closely at Dwan Mathis and seeing, does he have what it takes to one day be the starting quarterback? Listening closely to the things that we're hearing under the state of Florida, Carson Beck, the Georgia commit, does he have the makings of a future star? Does Georgia have to do what Florida State just did and take on a transfer quarterback? Alex Hornibrook's going to leave Wisconsin and go to Tallahassee. As Georgia appreciates Fromm, there is also a need to think about what's next after Fromm, too, is there not?
Oh, absolutely. You're drilling down on it right there, and that's the issue facing Georgia going forward. This is what remains to me such a perplexing thing with the whole Justin Fields equation, and I guess modern day football as a whole, because this was always, to me, I thought the way it was set up made sense to me. I know that was the sales pitch that Kirby Smart and Jim Chaney and the offensive brain trust at the time put on Justin Fields, that if things go the way we plan for them to go, you will have an opportunity to move into the starting role as a junior. Now, I'm sure they'd sell it to him in that way, per se. They told him that he'd come in and be able to beat out Fromm, and that's where the frustration came in. So now it is what it is. You got Dwan Mathis and Stetson Bennett in there. And I love, you and I have talked about it on this show before, I love that addition of Stetson Bennett. I think that really helps things in the immediate, should there be any problems with Fromm coming into this season, because Bennett's a guy who knows that system. Dwan Mathis, however, is a little bit farther away, and I don't think any of us view Stetson Bennett, all due respect to him, is really, an elite SEC-level quarterback, championship-level quarterback. So, yeah, it's going to have to come from recruiting. Jeff Sintel's all over it. You're all over it. Georgia's in on the best quarterbacks in the country, and as we've seen with Trevor Lawrence and many others, it's possible to come in and have a great impact as a freshman quarterback. But it's not easy. It's possible. So, yeah, Georgia's scouring the country, and I'm sure they'll sign, if not one elite quarterback in this coming class, maybe two.
So I want to be very candid about my current view of the quarterback situation, and I think that you had an interesting evaluation of it right there. I'm not yet sure that Mathis nor Bennett is a long-term starting quarterback for Georgia once that Jake Fromm is gone. But if you compare the two of them right now, I think there's a better chance that Mathis is one day a starting caliber quarterback in the SEC. But for 2019, I think it's probably a better chance that Stetson Bennett is the backup quarterback to Jake Fromm, and it sounds like you agree with that.
Yeah, look, he's 5'11", 185, 195, whatever they list him at, and they tend to measure those guys with cleats on, right, on hard concrete. So, and how many of those guys do you see running around, in Power 5 football right now? That's not to say that he can't do it. And I've heard nothing but great things about Stetson Bennett. We've repeated many times what Mel Tucker and Georgia's defensive players said as Georgia prepared for the Rose Bowl. His production was impressive at the junior college level, but being an every down quarterback, can that get you what you need in an SEC football season? I don't know, Georgia. Here's the thing about Kirby Smart, though. He's made it clear at every position, whether it be run backer or right guard or defensive tackle, they're constantly going to try to, and he doesn't just say recruit your position, he's trying to recruit over at the position. So he's always trying to create competition, and that's why, going through these breakdowns, PA, it's just really fascinating to read, up close when you start breaking it down, what Kirby and his staff have been able to do at every position. I mean, there's great competition, and there's, a glut at a couple of positions. And what generally has happened under his leadership is, there'll be a dearth that he recognizes somewhere. Like a few years ago, it was offensive line. 2 years later, you're looking at 15, 16, 18 offensive linemen of an elite level competing for those positions. Right now, there's a dearth, maybe here or there, maybe an inside linebacker, maybe at a couple other positions, but it's being addressed, significantly through recruiting. Same thing extends to quarterbacks and all the positions.
Let me move on to a different number two, not the number 2 quarterback this time, but the number 2 running back. And this is a part of the spring preview series that people can find at DawgNation.com. It's ongoing, and it's really, as I said before, a great way to get excited about spring practice and eventually G-Day coming up later on the month of April. But, Chip, my opinion about the running back position is very simple. I think that 2,500 yards, give or take 100 or 2, is a magic number for Georgia. I think it's got to be there. Otherwise, doing everything it wants to do this season, it's going to be a lot harder to do that if you don't have that, 13 or 1,400 yard leading rusher. We assume that's DeAndre Swift, and then 1,000 or 1,100 yards coming from the next guy. Between the competition of Harrion and White and Cook, I won't even ask you to sort of guess who the number 2 is going to be, but between that competition from the 3 there, adding to what DeAndre Swift already is Georgia going to be able to get back in that 2,400, 2,500 yard category again in 2019, you think?
Oh, absolutely I do, and it has as much to do with that offensive line as it does the candidates, in the backfield. I think that's, once you get to this level, it's not to devalue the running back position, because listen, let me be clear about it. I think DeAndre Swift is a very special talent, and we've all seen that. But his problem is a little bit of a small guy, and he obviously plays a position that takes a lot of punishment. He also plays in a way, the way DeAndre Swift plants and cuts is just otherworldly, but can lead to some, a lot of injuries when you play that way. But I agree with everything you say, and I would take it a step further. I think that number's 3,000 yards. I mean, I think that's what Georgia's looking for ultimately, and I think that's ultimately what it gets when it produces at least one elite rusher. But you're always going to have 4 or 5 who are going to get touches in Georgia's system, and some of that's going to come in the second half. But I think Brian Harrion's that guy. I don't have really a hard time coming to that conclusion. I think Brian Harrion is the type of guy at as a 6 foot, almost 6'1", 210. He's still listed 210 pounds, but I swear, BA, every time I see that guy, he looks like a 225 prototype tailback. He's a senior now, and I just compare it to Elijah Holyfield. I mean, if you look at Elijah Holyfield, Brian Harrion is everything that Elijah Holyfield was, but he's just a little bit bigger. He's just a little bit faster. And I think certainly in a change-up with DeAndre Swift, represents almost everything that Georgia had last year. Now, look, this was, you recounted ad nauseum the misses that Georgia had at the tailback position in recruiting this year, and the whole Elijah Holyfield equation still remains a little bit perplexing to me, and that's what's left a little bit of a gap in there. But I think between that offensive line, what DeAndre Swift's going to give you, and just the general makeup of Georgia's offense and offensive strategy, I think Georgia's going to get what they need. 3,000 yards, that's the number for me. If you get 3,000, you can look for Georgia to be in that playoff.
That would certainly be a very exciting thing to think about. Chip, let me talk about the wide receivers with you for a moment. Obviously, I've talked a ton about them already this offseason. I think that's a crucial thing for Georgia. And I guess what it comes down to for me is, and you've written about this, and we've all had our turn on this, there's no shortage of potential names for Georgia, the wide receiver position, and I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Georgia's going to be pretty good at wide receiver this year. But I think Georgia also needs for a guy to step up head and shoulders better than the rest. In other words, can they find a great receiver amongst this crop of good receivers? What's your early handicap on that?
Yeah, I love your focus on the wide receivers, Brandon. I would venture out there to say it's almost an obsession. But I do, and I understand why, and because obviously Georgia just lost a tremendous amount of production. I mean, that can't be underplayed how much production they lost. But I really like what Georgia has coming back, and I think kind of in a way a door has sort of been kicked open for some of these guys, and I think guys like Tyler Simmons are fascinating me. I mean, we know I think it's clear that J.J. Holloman, is an SEC, elite receiver and can get the job done. Tyler Simmons doesn't have that distinction, though, but, people forget about this kid. Not only is he again, I'll use this term, otherworldly blocker, which is so important to Kirby Smart, which he's made infinitely clear, but he's also one of the fastest players on the team. Another one of the fastest players on the team is Demetrius Robertson. And it's you kind of look at it retrospectively, and you can understand it. It's still hard to believe Demetrius Robertson didn't have a catch last year, but you look at it, and he was really behind three people at that position in McCole Hardman and Akil Crumpton and Terry Godwin, and that was a lot of room to make up just to be able to get in the rotation. And then Georgia tried to pick and choose its spots with him, and really try to build in some special big plays. But I think Demetrius Robertson is an every down type of wide receiver, and once he gets in there and has that opportunity, which he obviously will have this year, that's going to be a fascinating thing. Then you throw in the 5 stars that Georgia signed in Pickens and Blaylock, and we're not even mentioning all those other guys. We tend to forget in these time of year the guys that have been waiting in the wings, guys like Kyrus Jackson, who's been redshirted for a year, or the guys that aren't in the middle of the rotation. But yeah, I'm like everybody else. Can't wait to see Pickens. Can't wait to see Blaylock and where they might be able to fit in. But again, the total of Georgia's defense, to me, it always lands back on that offensive line and that quarterback. And I think that just gives you all kinds of a heads up. Look, you don't need necessarily Julio Jones, to come in there and have a productive passing game the way Georgia's set up. They've got plenty of guys who I think are capable of getting the job done and can get deep on some secondaries on those play action fake. I think there's plenty of guys of that pedigree in Georgia's camp right now.
Let me finish up with this, and I'll admit this could not matter less, but I do love the soap opera behind college football, and I thought you had an interesting take on this the other day. So, as you know, Eddie Gran, the Kentucky offensive coordinator, goes public in Lexington about once again being offered the Georgia offensive coordinator job. And as I've said, for me, his take on this and the Georgia take on this probably to a certain extent comes down to semantics. But you pointed out something at DawgNation that I thought was kind of interesting, that just given the particulars of this situation, it seems reasonable to assume that he was probably offered some sort of co-offensive coordinator role at Georgia to go along with a guy that he'd worked with in the past in James Coley. I think that's an interesting way to look at what likely happened. But I guess, Chip, it boils down to this, and this is the thing I'm curious to get your opinion on. Do you think that Georgia, whether it's Gran or somebody else, Dan Enos, I guess you could factor into this too, who's now at Miami, do you think that Georgia would have offered play calling responsibilities to someone before it offered those to James Coley?
Yeah, no, I don't think they would. I don't think that was ever the plan. And look, let me tell you, I can't really write this per se because, I can't substantiate it unequivocally. But let me tell you what's going on here. the power broker in the Southeastern Conference in the SEC is Jimmy Sexton, the agent who represents almost every head coach in the SEC. He represents Kirby Smart. He also represents Eddie Gran. And look, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes on. I don't think Eddie Gran ever had the intention of leaving Kentucky and coming to Georgia. I don't think Georgia ever had the intention of hiring Eddie Gran to come on at Georgia. If you think that's the truth, then you got to think that he's willing to come on and take a back seat to James Coley as offensive coordinator and effectively a demotion, or either just come to Georgia as an $850,000 or $900,000 a year tight end. Come on. Let's be honest about this. And so, they come in, they fly in here, they meet with you. Hey, how you doing, man? Good to see you. Yeah, you got a position like that? Yeah. Would you be interested? And then they go back and tell them, hey, I talked to Georgia. Is he lying? No, he talked to Georgia. What did he talk to Georgia about? I don't know. I wasn't in the room with Kirby Smart and Eddie Gran, and they're both going to say what they're going to say, and we'll never really know what the truth is. But all I think that is just I think it goes on all the time in college football. I think it goes on in the NFL. It's a huge fraternity, and the bottom line is Eddie Gran got a nice little bump out of it, and he'll be the offensive coordinator for Kentucky when they come back to Sanford Stadium next year. Now, whether anything he said or did upset Kirby Smart or is in tandem with Kirby Smart, I don't know. We'll never know the truth. But that's what happened here. And at the end of the day, James Coley was always going to be Georgia's offensive coordinator. I believe he was always going to be Georgia's chief strategist and play caller. And that's certainly what he is now. And I'm eager to see what it looks like. I think he's excited about it. And I think he's got a lot of parts to work with as we just went over.
Chip, really good stuff. And, boy, I'm just like you. I'm eager to see how it all starts coming together starting this spring. We'll continue to enjoy reading your spring previews at DawgNation.com, and we'll look forward to having you back here on DawgNation Daily again very soon as well.
You got it. About to publish some inside linebackers book right now.
That's a pretty good group, Chip. That'll be a good read.
All right.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, inside linebackers. You talk about a long group of names for potential competition there. That's a fun, deep group at Georgia. That's going to be a lot of fun to see at DawgNation.com from Chip Towers. As we transition to our SEC Through, let me remind you about our friends over at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They do a lot of really cool things, and this is important for your house, right? It's foundation repair, it's basement waterproofing, it's crawl space encapsulation, but sometimes there's a little nervousness, a little anxiety about, oh, gosh, a cracked foundation just seems really, really hard to fix. But, for Engineered Solutions of Georgia, I think one of the things you're going to find is it's nowhere near as challenging as you might think because they got a full-time engineer on staff. They do this for a living. These are experts at this, and so they're going to show you a plan for getting your house back the way it needs to be in a way that's not going to be as bad as you might think, and it's going to just really go great. And so if you've got a cracked foundation, wet basement, or a damp crawl space, that's the evidence that something's not quite the way that it needs to be. Engineered Solutions of Georgia can get your house back up into perfect ship-shape condition. So give them a call right now at 678 ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Great, easy phone number to remember, and it's always fun to talk about Engineered Solutions of Georgia right here on DawgNation Daily. All right, let me give you a quick piece of breaking news. New York Post is reporting that Urban Meyer, just like before, has now taken a TV analyst job. He's going to work with Fox, and it sounds like, according to what the Post is reporting, that Fox is now trying to build an empire from a college football standpoint that rivals what ESPN is doing. And that, as much as anything, can be worth watching here. We all know that Meyer's a total fraud and a total phony, that this departure from Ohio State is no different than one from Florida. We think he's going to be back coaching again at some point in time really soon. That just seems obvious. And just like he went to ESPN before, this is like the one-year stopover that probably gets him the USC job or whatever else. You can fill in the blanks on that on your own time. But watching Fox try to grow its football broadcasting presence in the college football world could also be really interesting, not just because some of this drama is always fun to watch, but remember, what have we seen the last couple of years? The leagues that Fox broadcasts for, Big Ten included, they're not really a part of the college football conversation. And sometimes, I should say the playoff conversation, they've been excluded. So for a lot of these teams that Fox does games for, compared to, like, say, the SEC, where they just seem to have a better argument in favor of them, as Fox tries to grow its TV presence, does that also benefit the other leagues for which Fox broadcasts? That could become an interesting thing to watch here. So New York Post reporting that Urban Meyer is going to be a TV analyst for them. So I guess no teaching the ethics class or whatever it was he was supposed to teach. I guess all that's now in the rearview mirror. All right, speaking of inside linebackers, very interesting contrast. Chip's about to post his piece at DawgNation.com showing how deep Georgia is that position. There is reason to believe right now that Alabama is not quite as deep. And this is, I guess, potentially a serious story, although I have no idea what's going on. But Ali Cahoe, I'm probably butchering that name. You'll remember Cahoe, though. We've talked a good bit about him. At one point in time, this is a big steal for Alabama. Cahoe had initially signed with Washington, but Alabama swoops in and gets him. It was a little bit weird that he left Washington when he did. Shows up at Alabama, kind of a special teams guy, I guess, last year, but thought to be right in the middle of that interior linebacker competition for the Crimson Tide this year. But he's been away from the team as they're beginning spring practice, and it's safe to say that no one really knows what's going on. At least Alabama's not talking a ton about this. There are also some reports that KO is getting ready to come back to practice again, so maybe whatever he's dealing with in his personal life. Saban said something to the effect that he's kind of dealing with some stuff right now. I think that was Saban's way of describing this. Sounds like, according to some reports, I think Rivals had this, that he's going to come back to practice. But watch for Alabama this spring dealing with a little bit of an uncertain situation for its interior linebackers. That's a position where they've dealt with a lot of injuries and everything else. So this one could be worth watching and paying attention to. Let me also, for a moment, make kind of an obscure point about something. I talked before, and I told Chip I love the soap opera of college football. One of the things that many of you are also really aware of is how much I love coaching rumors. I live for it. Some of you know that so much that you even send me news stories and things like that involve juicy coaching rumors, because many of you know how much I like them. Over the course of the last couple of years in the SEC, really for a while now, when coaching rumors popped up, there were two names you always heard. Remember, you always heard the connection John Gruden to Tennessee, the groomers as they were called, that Gruden was going to swoop in and save Tennessee, and then seemingly you heard Chip Kelly's name, the former Oregon Philadelphia Eagles coach, mentioned for every opening that came up. Well, guess what? Now we're back to having both Kelly and Gruden coaching again, neither coaching the SEC. John Gruden's the coach of the Raiders. Chip Kelly's the coach of UCLA. I think we're starting to see some evidence that those rumors connecting Gruden and Kelly to all these SEC jobs, I think we're starting to see that those SEC teams that didn't hire Kelly and Tennessee not hiring John Gruden, that's going to end up being viewed as a very good decision. We don't talk NFL here. I'm a much bigger college football fan. But for the Raiders to skip on paying Khalil Mack, the pass rusher, a bunch of money in his prime, only to see Mack go to the Chicago Bears and light the league on fire, only to then give even more money to an Antonio Brown that from an age standpoint might be past his prime, I think it shows that the Gruden era with the Raiders is on its way to being an unmitigated disaster. And Tennessee hiring Pruitt instead of Gruden, if that was ever even a real possibility, is actually going to end up being, for the Vol standpoint, a really good thing. I don't know how good I don't know how good Pruitt is as a coach, but he's going to be a better manager in the SEC than Gruden would have been. Chip Kelly the same way. There are plenty of media reports that would have told you that Chip Kelly and Florida had gotten very far down the line in talking to each other. I said at the time that I wish Florida was this dumb, but I know ultimately it won't be. It's not going to hire Chip Kelly because Chip Kelly's too weird to coach in the SEC. Well, look at him at UCLA. Their recruiting class barely finished in the top 50. They lost a kid to Washington who chose to walk on in Seattle as opposed to get a scholarship in beautiful Westwood of Los Angeles. Chip Kelly would have been a disaster in the SEC. So I don't really know what that means, but the nature of rumors when it comes to coaching in the SEC is forever changed because, you know, these heroes that have been viewed as we're going to step in and swoop in and dominate the league and save the embattled program, the John Gruden, the Chip Kelly, you got a lot of evidence right now that neither of these coaches are as good as at one point in time they were cracked up to be. Also, one more really, really quick SEC story because I'm running a little late here. Count me as pro Will Wade in the Will Wade versus FBI versus NCAA versus LSU battle. That's a lot of acronyms, I realize, but count me on Wade's side. I have no idea why the FBI is weighing in on this, wading into these waters. That doesn't make any sense to me. The NCAA has zero credibility when it comes to this. They come down hard on the Ole Misses, the LSUs of the world. They let programs like North Carolina skate on different issues, but in some respects more serious issues. LSU is suspending indefinitely Wade. Javonte Smart, one of their players, but if you really think you've got the goods on Wade, then why not just fire him? LSU's trying to have it both ways. I think Joey Olivas, the athletic director, has no credibility in this whatsoever. Wade may not be an angel. That's certainly true, but he's not that different than the rest of college basketball, so I think he's being treated unfairly. So let me just weigh in on that, and we'll call that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, before I give away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt, let me go back in time to a little earlier in the program. Now, Chip Towers also weighed in on the subject of wide receivers, but we talked about what some former Georgia receivers, guys like Riley Ridley and Terry Godwin and McCole Hardman, had told DawgNation a few days ago about who they believed was going to step up. Some of the names you heard a lot of were, we heard Matt Lander's name a few times. J.J. Holloman's name obviously comes up over and over. Tyler Simmons' name comes up over and over. But Mike Griffith, who was the reporter on hand to collect those quotes from the three former Georgia receivers, he thought it was very interesting, a name that you did not hear come up in that discussion. And last week on DawgNation Daily, Mike pointed that out.
I wondered why nobody was talking about Demetrius Robertson. I didn't hear his name, and I didn't want to follow up and ask, because then it wouldn't have been a very genuine interview if I asked the open-ended question, who are some guys we're going to hear from? And that was what they said. Now, maybe they were under the impression that I was looking for younger guys' names. I don't know what they were thinking, but I thought it was really odd that nobody mentioned Demetrius Robertson's name.
So why did Ridley and Hardman and Godwin not mention Demetrius Robertson when they were talking about potential breakouts for Georgia in 2019? Obviously, none of us know for sure, but if we listen to Georgia coach Kirby Smart in the past, I think he might suggest, because just because you have the highest recruiting accolades, after all, Robertson was a former five-star, that doesn't necessarily mean you're destined to win the competition at Georgia. Here's how Kirby Smart said that last summer.
How they came in does not matter to us. That means nothing in that room. Every time you guys print something about the receivers, it's about how many 5-stars are in there. But the guys that are playing best right now in there, none of them had 5 stars. So we go off performance. I mean, the receiver position is, where do you help the team the most? Can you cover a kick? Can you block somebody? Can you make a play outside on the perimeter that nobody can make? And right now, that has nothing to do with what you were regarded as coming in. So is the culture of competition good? Absolutely. Because maybe those guys that were 3 stars and 4 stars have outworked the guys that were 5, because none of that makes a decision for us. All we do is say, who's playing well? And right now, the guys that are playing best at receiver were not the highly regarded guys.
So I think it's an interesting point from Kirby Smart, and I guess here's my wrap-up on all of this. I don't think Mike Griffith is wrong for pointing out that the other Georgia receivers didn't mention Robertson, but because they didn't mention Robertson, I don't think that necessarily means that those guys won't see Robertson emerge as the breakout guy. I think hearing Kirby say things like he just heard for a year can make an impact on you. I think that's going to make a positive impact on Demetrius Robertson. I am still expecting big things from him in 2019. Let me also get ready to give away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt. And let's go back to the beginning and do it the way we did it on the very first day. The email to remember, dndtshirts@gmail.com. Once again, dndtshirts@gmail.com. Send me a pic of you having subscribed to DawgNation on YouTube. Even if you did it before, go ahead and send it again so we can draw a new crop of names. We'll give away a Road to Atlanta t-shirt right here on DawgNation Daily tomorrow. Also, Gator Hater Updater. We love beating those lousy, stinking Gators, and it's been 863 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We got heated up during the show today. A lot to talk about, and so it's a great chance to kind of take a deep breath and cool down now with our R.S. Andrews cool down and give you a chance to weigh in with your thoughts on Georgia football or UGA athletics or anything in between. So appreciate you being a part of that and appreciate R.S. Andrews making it all possible for us. Check out rsandrews.com. If you've got a heating and plumbing issue, air conditioning, by the way, that's about to be, you're about to need that air conditioning again. It's a high of 60s all week, I think. One of these nights this week, we're not even going to go much lower than 56, 57 degrees, I don't think. It means it's about time to kick that air conditioner back on. Is yours working the way it's supposed to? I want to check out R.S. Andrews to make sure it's ready and up and running and ready to go. They're clean and screened and trained techs will come over and do everything they need to make sure your air conditioning is ready to make it through the warm weather season, which is about to begin. Also, electrical issues, plumbing issues, everything in between, R.S. Andrews will take good care of. You check them out online at rsandrews.com. Now, let's get a bunch of comments, and we'll do that on any subject. You can kind of weigh in on anything that you'd like. Give me just 1 second to pull up the comments. I apologize. Hope you all had a great weekend, by the way. Hope you did fun stuff. Naturally, it's 15 clicks to get this video thing up and running, but we're going to get it going here. And get going. Somebody mentioned Adam Anderson in the comment section. Yeah, Anderson's going to be one of those guys that I'm really looking forward to watch just because he just looks the part so much. You know, Anderson is, when you see him in person, is shockingly tall. You know, Georgia, I think the interesting things about the Kirby Smart era is that Georgia, for the most part, has recruited a tall crop of players. Generally speaking, Kirby seems to favor taller players. Probably a lot of really good reasons for that. But even on a team of tall players, Anderson is wow factor tall. And I think from a pass rush standpoint, those long limbs, that tall frame, just gives you extra leverage and extra ability to blow past a would-be blocker. I think Anderson's a really fun guy to think about. Ro Hawkins says D-Rob will be okay in the return game along with Cook. Yeah, and that's an important thing. You know, Hardman was really good in that role, and finding that next guy is going to be crucial in that. And, you know, I think you mentioned Cook. You mentioned a Robertson as a possible guy there. It's obviously easy to understand why they would be considerations because of their speed. I think Kyrus Jackson probably gets a look there in that respect. That could be very interesting to see. Keith Finley also mentioning Adam Anderson as well. And I've said this before, but one of my favorite things about Anderson is the fact that he wears 56. That's what Keith pointed out, number 56. I love the fact that, you know, I grew up in an era where, you know, there were numbers associated with positions, and those 50s numbers were linebacker numbers. And the fact that Anderson's still wearing that old school linebacker number, you know, now these days, you know, once again, I'm going to sound like Grandpa BA, but kids these days, they all want to wear 1 through 9. One of these days, it's just going to be nothing but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 on the field. I love the fact that Anderson's keeping it real with the linebacker number. I very much appreciate that. Very much appreciate that. Phil Rogers says, BA got to have a pass rush with our front seven to cause turnovers. That is really true. That is very true. That one of the things that, you know, turnovers can be really difficult to predict, right? If you look at the first half of the season, the program's seemingly forcing the most turnovers. Very rarely are the teams that do that in the second half of the season. Teams that have the most turnovers forced over the course of a year very rarely come back and do that again the following year. There's not a strong correlation between turnover success from game to game, year to year. It's just a very erratic stat. But one of the things that does kind of connect to that a bit, defenses that get into the backfield a lot generally find their way to a few loose footballs, either tipped passes that turn into interceptions, big hits that turn into fumbles. It's hard. Coaches talk all the time about forcing turnovers. Forcing turnovers is actually a really difficult thing to do, but being in the backfield seems to be a pretty good strategy towards doing that. So front seven obviously helps get that done. That's a really good point. Rhodey Williams talking about Jermaine Johnson. Yeah, I'm excited about Jermaine Johnson too. ESPN's written about him. That to me is a potential breakout. All right, we got some controversy. John McMillan brings us up. Connor Raleigh, do you mind joining us? We have major controversy. So the Facebook audience is unhappy. Some people are being listed as a top fan. Do you have any idea what that is?
No idea.
This is new, right?
Yeah, this is the first I've ever heard
This is
of it.
coming from Mark Zuckerberg, right?
If you want to blame him, go ahead.
This is not like, to my knowledge, and the only people who would do this are likely sitting in this room. To my knowledge, DawgNation has not played favorites with DawgNation daily viewers.
We would never. We love all of our listeners equally.
Yeah, you're all top fans to us. So because I actually just saw this too. Like Matt Talley's a top fan. Matt, how are you a top fan? I like his comment. He says, "What if?" He says, "We can't all be top fans. Make people earn it." But Matt, what did you? Not that you're not a top fan. My guess is you are. But what did you do to become a top fan? I've never seen this before.
I have a conspiracy theory here. This is a ploy done by the YouTube audience to sort of undermine the Facebook audience and create chaos amongst there.
So this is the New Orleans Hornets, or New Orleans Pelicans, basically saying that trying to drop these trade rumors in the Lakers to try to create bad team chemistry.
In a way to like undermine the Facebook audience and gain favor with you.
I think that is a terrific opinion, and what a shrewd move on the part of YouTube of. Let's call some of them top fans and others not, and let's watch them rip each other's throats out. Santiago Diarra, congratulations to top fan status for him. Nick Vernon, not a top fan. Matt Rukavina says, how do I not have a top fan? Listen, you can't blame this on us. The last thing I'm going to do is take about 40% of you, make some of you top fans, and have the rest of you be mad at me. Y'all know good and well we're not doing
Matt Rukavina needs to be a top fan.
Don Williams says it's based purely on an algorithm based on comments and activity. That's probably true, but I mean, as the fact that I recognize a lot of names in here who I think of as being very active, the fact they haven't been given top fan status, just boy, I don't know. I don't know about that at all. Let me pull up the YouTube comments. Let's see if there's any top fans over here on YouTube. But very controversial. Very controversial to start the week. YouTube people are just fighting with each other.
Will Muller thinks it's the Gumps.
Is this
Alabama?
Let me tell you something. Give me the 1,000 most likely groups of people to have done this. The last group on that list is going to be a bunch of incel Alabama fans. There's not any chance whatsoever they could have figured out how to do that. Jacob Thompson says on YouTube, top fans don't need labels. That's just to make the Facebookers feel better about themselves.
To paraphrase, rewatching Game of Thrones as that quickly approaches a comeback.
Yeah.
To paraphrase Tywin Lannister, top fans don't need to call themselves top fans to know that they're top fans.
That's exactly right. By the way, I guess it also brings to mind, too, of Winston Mock giving us a nice little Hulk Hogan quote. That's maybe one reason why he's a top fan. Yeah, I mean, if I'm making my choice of who gets to be top fan status, it's references to 1980s professional wrestling would go a long way towards getting that. See, here's where Facebook's creating all kinds of problems. You got Brian Jones weighing and goes, I listen every day. How am I not a top fan? And listen, the last thing in the world I would have done is designate some sort of top fan status. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. That's who does stuff like that. That's Jeff's deal. Jeff with the forum where everybody's got like a different there's freshmen, sophomores, there's all Americans, all that kind of stuff. The forum is very hierarchical. We don't want to have any kind of hierarchy here on this show. We're all equal. We're all equal.
And you're giving BA way too much credit if you think he has the technological know-how to go in and program who is the top fan and who is not.
Honestly, that is an unassailable point. And many of you are aware of this too. Like, I can barely find the comments. About a year or so ago, the comments went from loading top up to loading bottom up. It took me a month to figure out how to even read the comments, given the fact that they were now loading in a different way. If y'all think I have the technology available to do something like this, now Reginald Johnson says, I listen daily, but I don't always write on the show. Listen, whether you watch or comment or whatever, we like you no matter what. There is no top fan thing for us. This is another example of that dadgum Zuckerberg just ruining everything. Robert Barnes says top fan, just another way to divide the fan base. Yeah, that's the last thing we need is more division among Georgia fans. Although it does seem like a lot of you have earned it. David Hemansky says, I got a notification on Friday that I've been awarded top fan status. I had no idea where it came from. Matt Rukavina also very happy with Connor's Game of Thrones reference. There's also more shots being taken at YouTube on here. Keith Finley also reminds that in addition to antiquated professional wrestling reference, I'm also interested in Star Wars references as well. Joel Moody says, which show is the oldest, the Facebook podcast, the YouTubers asking for a friend? So yeah, Joel does remind us that that Facebook does have heritage on its side. That's the place where he started first. David Hemansky says it's not about listening, it's about interacting. But here's the truth, though. One of the things that and you'll see this reflected in the way we're giving away our Road to Atlanta T-shirt. One of the things that we're also trying to do this year, though, is in addition to the people that are able to interact live, we want to try to recreate this experience as much as we can for the non-live viewers, because whether it be podcast, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, the majority of people who connect with the show actually do it other than 10 a.m. local time, or as some of you snarky people will say, 10:09 local time. A lot of people just watch the show later on. So we do want to try to, create that opportunity. And other people are like, they're going to get in trouble with their boss if they get caught watching the show, so they can't do a whole lot of interacting. I've always said before that one of the things we're going to eventually do is create an interface for the show that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. That way people can just have it up on their screen and be able to, watch the show without getting caught. So listen, however you come in, we're just glad you're here. Scott Harris says, come on, BA, we all know you run the internet. If I ran the internet, this thing would look a lot different than it does right now. A lot different. Nick Lurch says, then give my $20 back to me. In other words, he paid $20 for his top fan status. Alex Dean asks a good question. This is a really good question. He says, do you want to see Fields with Ohio State and Jake Fromm with UGA go head-to-head in the playoffs? And without getting into a can of worms, because I know people would be mad we even mentioned Justin's name, I feel differently about this than I probably did when Kirby was at Georgia and Rick was first at Miami, where the media just couldn't wait to contrive some sort of scenario where Georgia played Miami, college football playoff included. When Rick left to go to Miami, I have to say that I did not want Georgia to play Miami, and I'm glad that it never happened. I would not have liked seeing that. I had 15 years of backstory with Rick. I've got like 15 minutes of backstory with Justin Fields. So would I fully embrace a Fromm versus Fields game, Georgia versus Ohio State? I have to admit, I kind of would. I don't have any extra animosity towards Fields or anything like that, but the way in which I would have shied away from, this wouldn't be good for Georgia to have Georgia playing Rick so soon after he left, I don't quite feel the same way about Justin Fields at Ohio State. Now, first of all, just being in the playoff, there's a just given the history of the playoff, there's a good chance you'll be playing Ohio State anyway. They've been kind of a fixture in that discussion for the totality of the run. But I wouldn't shy away from that matchup. I got no problem with that. I wish Justin well. I'm sure he'll be really fun to watch. They've actually started spring practice, and I will admit, I have checked in on some Columbus media coverage to see how Justin's doing, and thus far it seems like he's doing pretty well, although I guess there's a little bit of a competition going on there with, I think his name's Matthew Baldwin, I think his name is. So I've checked in on Fields already a couple times, but in terms of shying away from seeing Fromm and Fields together, I don't believe that I would, and I definitely would have when it was Mark Richt on another sideline. I didn't want that game to take place, but I don't feel the same way about Georgia and Ohio State. Connor, you got a thought on that?
Would you rather? I have another question.
All right.
Would you rather see Justin Fields in the playoff against Georgia or Jacob Eason in the playoffs against?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming that Washington's the easier team to beat just because of the depth of the overall roster. So, from that standpoint, you might choose that. But in terms of the quarterbacks themselves, I don't have a feeling about that one way or another. I don't have a feeling about that one way or another. As I said before, the thing I think we have to do around here is there's no reason to talk about Fields every single day because he's no longer connected to Georgia. But at the same time, there's no reason to pretend that he doesn't exist either. Fields is now, I believe, going to be the starting quarterback for a team that's right there in the thick of the playoff conversation seemingly every year. And playing Fields will be no different than playing Kyler Murray would have been last year or, Baker Mayfield would have been before that, a really good quarterback that Georgia might have to deal with. And the fact that he once it was at Georgia will make it more interesting for the media, but head-to-head, this is the way it's going to kind of be. Gene King says, who do you think the next commit's going to be? Gene, that's a really good question, and we'll have Jeff on tomorrow. And obviously we're heading into a time where recruiting's going to heat up, and it may not be so much the next commitment as it is. The fun thing is going to be watching that G-Day guest list come together. And, we've seen Georgia get commitments on G-Day. We also saw Georgia get a pretty high-profile decommitment on G-Day a couple years ago when Adam Anderson briefly let go of his Georgia pledge. But watching that G-Day guest list come together is going to be really, really interesting Does it include Brian Brzee? That could be telling. Carson Beck showing up on campus. That could be telling. A lot of those guys coming in, does Marshawn Lloyd come down from D.C.? Does Kendall Milton come across country from California? Those are expensive trips for these long, national recruits. But watching that list come together for G-Day, that's actually going to be the really fun thing. And I'm hoping we can start doing some of that kind of stuff.
And so one thing, Georgia, if you want to get a very, very clear picture of Georgia's recruiting board, G-Day is going to give it to you, because there are a lot of spring games the week before that 13th. I think Oklahoma has theirs, Alabama has theirs, Auburn has theirs. There are a lot of those in that time period. Georgia kind of has that post-Masters weekend to itself. So there's not going to be like, oh, I'm checking out another school.
When you said post-Masters, I thought you were talking about the postmaster. I was like, what does the post office have to do with this? You meant the week after the Masters, the postmasters. At first I was like,
postmasters, pre-NFL draft. They're going to have that weekend of themselves. So the guys who you think are really interested in committing to and coming to Georgia, I think they're going to make it a point to be at that game to sort of see that atmosphere.
Yeah, that could be a really good point. Could be a really good point. Gerald Harmon says, I don't want to see a Georgia versus Ohio State game. I'm still a Justin Fields fan. He's a hometown kid. And Gerald, I think that's a fair point. I think that's for people that have that deeper connection to Fields, know him growing up, something like that. You say, I'm a fan of his personally. I'm not ready to watch him go head to head against UGA. I think that's a fair point. I don't have that same personal connection to Fields, so the Georgia side of this is probably more important to me. But if you do have that personal link to Fields, or you feel like you're a fan of his personally, which is a fair choice to make, then you may say, let it be somebody else other than Ohio State. Reginald Johnson says, BA, who's going to lead the team in sacks, and how many sacks will Georgia have this year? I think those are both two really good questions. As far as who's going to lead the team in sacks, I'm not as sure about that. As far as how many sacks Georgia will have this year, I think it needs to be more than 40. I think that 40 is a really crucial number. And I kind of floated the idea the other day that the SEC champion between Georgia and Alabama will be the one that has the most team sacks this season. I'm not quite so sure I'm wrong about that. I think there's a chance that may end up being true. Mike Mitchum says that he received a message from Facebook that all top fans also get DawgNation t-shirts. Mike, that's a pretty good comment for sure. For sure. Let me go back over to YouTube here for a moment.
As far as sacks, I think Georgia's going to finish. This was a question that popped up on the forum, DawgNation forum the other day. I think Georgia's going to finish with 36 sacks this season.
Not too few.
4 sacks,
Citrus
too few.
Bowl.
If I had said 40, would you have been okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
36 sacks. Citrus Bowl.
Don't say that. And then I'm going to go off the board for the sack leader.
All right.
I'm going to go Channing Tindall.
Ooh.
With 6
from the inside?
From the inside.
Wow. That's an interesting thing.
Georgia likes to blitz. Georgia, under Kirby Smart, has shown that when they do blitz, they like to bring pressure up that A-gap with the middle linebacker. Tindall flashed a little bit of that ability last year. He did have 2 sacks. So I think he's a guy this year Georgia can employ in a similar manner on third down and passing situations. And I think he's someone who's going to have a very big year.
So that leads to a different discussion of, now you don't have Georgia getting at 40, but let's say that they get to 40. Can you get to 40 without having a double-digit guy?
Yes, but that means you probably have a guy who has like 8.5, 9, and a guy who has like 6.5, 7.
And you kind of squabble with me for saying that 40 was way different than 36, but as we've been saying a lot this offseason, these little bit of numbers I do believe matter. What I keep saying about the passing game, Georgia got to throw the ball 4 more times per game next year. If you look at some of the other offenses that have had great success, that's the difference. And they got to find 2 more deep completions per game. Now you may say, what's the difference between 2 and 1? I don't know, but over the course of a long season, it does add up to be something different. 4 sacks, depending on when they come, that's a huge difference in field position. And, if those sacks come on third down, that's a change of possession. It might as well be an interception at that point. We obviously don't know what your 36 sacks, my 40 sacks, we don't know what the 4 sacks that make up the difference would look like. But, boy, it's really easy to presume they're going to have great value when they occur. Or a lost opportunity when they don't occur.
I mean, I would also just say Georgia, in its 12 regular season games this year, had 20 sacks. 36, that's almost double what they had the year before. It's an 80% improvement.
But how many sacks did Quinnen Williams have for Alabama last year? I apologize. I'm assuming it's double digits.
I don't think it is.
Is it not? But whatever it is, you're subtracting that from Alabama's total for this year. So,
yeah, he had 19.5 tackles for loss, but only 8 sacks.
Okay, well, 8's still a pretty good bit. So you're subtracting that number. 19.5 is pretty impressive. So I mean, you know, for Alabama, who's rebuilding its pass rush a little bit this year too, you know, it's going to try to find a way to replicate those. And so I don't think you're asking some Herculean task for Georgia. Like now, you're saying, hey, 36 compared to the 20 in the regular season is a lot more, but I don't think it's a Herculean task to ask for a lot more. This is Georgia trying to win a national championship, and national championship teams have a certain look to them, and a whole bunch of sacks is one thing that national championship teams typically have in common.
Conversely, Georgia almost won a national championship in 2017 when it only had 34 sacks over the course of 15 games.
Right, but 34 is a lot more than it had a year ago. So, I mean, and it came just short of winning the national championship, and, you know, who knows what a few more sacks in 2017 would have made that defense even look like. So,
and I will also add, so 8 of those 34 sacks came in the playoff games. So,
yeah.
And if you include so during the regular season, they had 23 sacks, only 3 more than this year.
So, I don't want to get lost in the weeds here, but if this Georgia team from this past year had to play a Rose Bowl game against Baker Mayfield, now you're saying, well, Georgia collected a lot of sacks in that game, which added to its sack total, but it was also capable of getting to the quarterback. I don't know that the 2018 Georgia team playing a quarterback like Mayfield is going to throw the ball a lot. I just don't know that they could have gotten there. You know, it was DeAndre Walker, and that's about it. So I think we're essentially agreeing on the point that because of these, you know, whether it be the 2018 class, 2019 class, whomever, this collection of guys, hopefully they're more capable of getting to the quarterback, because the 2018 team was just, I think, limited in its ability to do that beyond DeAndre Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point we will agree with, right?
Yeah, it's a fair point. Other than DeAndre Walker, they did not have a consistent pass rusher. However, I will counter with I think DeAndre Walker was a better pass rusher than anyone on the 2017 team.
Let me go up to Cliff Payne here on YouTube for a moment, who says, other side of the ball for a moment. He says, James Coley has quite possibly the most loaded offensive line Georgia's ever had. I think it's indisputably true. Indisputably true.
Oh, come on.
Are you serious?
Give Mike Bobo some credit.
The most loaded offensive line Georgia's ever had?
Oh, offensive line.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
you said offensive mind.
No. He says the most loaded offensive line Georgia has ever had. Yeah, I won't start comparing offensive minds yet. But loaded offensive line, I don't think there's any debate about that whatsoever. Georgia has more offensive line talent in the program right now than it's ever had before. He says it must be nice. He better deliver quickly and take advantage of all this talent at his disposal. And I do think that's also probably fair to point out, too, that he's under a little bit of pressure to do something with that. And if you listen to the fans that weigh in, top fans and otherwise, here in our comment section daily, the one thing that I think you hear is some of the pressure that Coley's facing is to add to the Georgia offense. And I believe that Kirby selected Coley because he was going to be able to maintain what Georgia was already good at. That's probably a pretty good decision. But in addition to that, the Georgia fan is saying, now add to it. Show me some more wrinkles. Be more creative at the goal line. Find a way to get receivers more involved with deep throws. And to that standpoint, I mean, Coley's going to have some pressure. First of all, Jim Chaney had a ton of pressure. I think you're kidding yourself if that's not part of the reason why he chose to move on to Tennessee. Chaney's one of those guys that knows you have to move around to kind of keep the critics at bay, and I think that's part of what led him, in addition to the money, to move on to Knoxville. But some of the criticism that Chaney faced, Coley will inherit some of that, and that's just the nature of the beast. No matter how much Kirby Smart might try to downplay the significance of coordinators, the guy with the play card in his hands on a Saturday is going to get some extra attention. And for Georgia fans in particular, there is a laundry list of things they're looking to see.
So we've talked a lot about Georgia's improved passing game, and the wide receivers. How much more is Jake Fromm going to throw more this year? Don't you think that Georgia kind of has to run the football more this year, just given that's clear far and away the strength of what this team is and what it does best.
When you say more, what do you mean by more?
Like we talk about the run-pass balance, and I think this past year was about 55-45. Is that fair to say?
What do you think the percentage will be for the 2019 season?
For the 2019 season, I'm saying the run-pass balance I think might actually be a little bit more tilted in favor of the run, maybe like a 60-40.
Like a 60-40?
Closer to what we saw in 2017.
And I'm sort of fine with that in terms of the total number of play calls. 60% run plays, 40% passing plays. As long as you're using those running plays to really go for home runs in the passing game, right? I mean, now if you want to get into the yardage split, I don't know if I'm ready to do the math on that yet. But in terms of the overall, just play design, 60% running plays, 40% passing plays, I'd be fine with that. As I said before with Chip Towers, your top two running backs, you still got to get 2,500 yards from those two guys. Otherwise, you're not going to the college football playoff. I mean, there are a lot of things you can list. The sack total, the rushing total, there are a lot of things that would exclude you from the playoff if you don't get that done. So you still got to get two big, 1,000-plus yard performances from running backs to be back in this discussion. I think for James Coley, it's what you do in addition to that that's really going to matter.
See, it appears that I've Mike Bobo is not a good name to talk about, especially in the YouTube comments.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to be with Connor on this one, and I felt this way back at the time. I think that Mike Bobo was a really good offensive coordinator. Now, here's what I believe. I don't know why I'm going to end up taking a bunch of slings and arrows for something that happened 15 years ago, but here's what I believe. That really smart people can be dumb in individual moments, and it is inexcusable that Georgia had the ball at the goal line against South Carolina in 2014 and didn't get Ty Gurley involved. That's inexcusable. That's a smart guy doing something dumb. But doing something dumb doesn't exclude you from being smart. When you look at the overall level of success that Bobo had, he's a really good offensive coordinator. He just is. I think the jury's still out on what kind of head coach he's going to be, and I think it's difficult to know how much Bobo's current health challenges are impacting his ability to be a really good coach. But there's no denying that Bobo is a really good offensive coordinator. And if you want to go back to all the examples in which the Georgia in the past wasn't playing to win at the highest level, to me, among the most egregious was keeping Mike Bobo in that kind of $500,000 range as an offensive coordinator at a time when you had many guys already approaching the $1 million mark. Georgia was basically getting Bobo for about 50% the going rate of an offensive coordinator. And so when a Colorado State job comes along, you feel like you have to take that job to get the money that you deserve. And people say, well, Bobo wanted to be a head coach. You're never going to turn that down. But coordinators turn down head coaching jobs all the time if they're waiting for something better. Maybe Bobo would have also done that with Colorado State. Maybe you could have kept him for a little bit longer. He loves the state of Georgia. He had strong recruiting ties to the state of Georgia. You could have kept Bobo for around a little bit longer. You'd have never had the disaster that was Brian Schottenheimer. Maybe Georgia history's changed forever because of that. But of all the examples of Georgia kind of playing at three-quarter speed prior to Kirby Smart, the way that Bobo was insultingly underpaid, to me, is a huge example of that.
I would agree with that. And if I could counter, yes, it wasn't a great play call in the South Carolina game. He also wasn't the one that missed a chip shot field goal that would have tied the game there. He also wasn't the one in charge of a defense that gave up 38 points to Connor Shaw. Or no, that was Dylan Thompson, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah.
It wasn't even Connor Shaw. And his offense averaged 40 points a game with Hudson Mason as its quarterback and Todd Gurley really only playing for 6 games this season.
Yeah.
Like, Georgia has not eclipsed that in any recent season other than that. In 2014, his last year as an offensive coordinator. So
Dennis Wilson, who's not a Georgia fan in the YouTube comment section, says, BA, you forget about Murray at the 4-yard line in the SEC championship game. And obviously that's a bad memory for Georgia fans, the 2012 deal. But that, to me, is not on Mike Bobo. Yes, it was a terrible thing. I mean, if you're Chris Conley, obviously going to catch that pass. Once again, if you want to go back and relitigate the past, I think part of the issue for Georgia at the goal line in 2012 was, as good a coach as Richt was, there was a lack of sharpness sometimes where you had to look to the sideline. Do you know, are you trying to get the ball off and run a quick play, or are you going to try to, spike the ball and save some time? I think that Georgia didn't always know what it wanted to do in the Richt era, and as good a coach as he was, I think that was part of the issue, and that was certainly the issue for Georgia in 2012. But I mean, you go back and look at the way that which Bobo used Murray, and somebody in the YouTube comment section a moment ago says Bobo was pass happy. That's why Murray put up the numbers that he did. That was just a really good offense. It was just a really, really good offense, and I don't think you have to explain that any deeper than that. Ty Middlebrook says Bobo's not a good recruiter. He told Deshaun Watson no. He told Cam Newton he was a tight end. Told Jamal Lewis he was too big to be a running back. Tried to get him to be a linebacker. The Lewis story I don't really know about too much. You may be right about that. Obviously, the Watson stuff was a mistake, and the Cam Newton situation, in retrospect, looks like a mistake. Once again, I don't know if that's so much Bobo's philosophy, or if that's so much what Rick's overarching philosophy was. Georgia did not recruit the quarterback position as deeply as it should have during the Rick era, and that's one of the biggest reasons why Rick finished just short of a national championship. That was that. I don't know if you put that on Bobo or not, though.
Right. I mean, we've seen time and time again, with quarterbacks, you have to recruit them early. Start early as a freshman and sophomore. Clemson got in on Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, because it offered them early and stuck with them early. And the reality is that just wasn't how Mark Richt went about recruiting quarterbacks, and that is more of, I think, a Mark Richt thing, more so maybe than a Mike Bobo issue.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Daniel Moore says Grantham's defense cost that game against Alabama. Yet in the second half, could not stop that Alabama run game, and you had that big lead and you just could not hold on to it. That really, really good Alabama running game kind of stepped up. Richard Sheffield, who's not a top fan, by the way, says, is there a game from 1974 we could dissect? Apparently Richard's not enjoying the walk down memory lane. I certainly understand that. That's not everybody's vibe. John McMillan also says, I've spent too much time on YouTube. I apologize for that. Chad Williams says, who won the AAL game yesterday? The Alliance of American Football. I recorded it, but the DVR stopped recording with 9 minutes to go. So Atlanta won. I ended up watching some of this. I have to say, my son's baseball game got rained out yesterday, so I was at home, and I was flipping channels, and I ended up probably not watching as much of this as I thought that I would. I was going back and forth between the golf, the race, and the football game, and it's cool to see Murray doing well. I can't decide what it is about the football league, though. I can't dive into this. If it sticks around for 10 years, maybe I will be. But as it stands right now, I didn't find myself wanting to tune back into it as much as I probably thought I would. I love seeing Cameron Nislek punting and doing as well as he's doing. That's awesome. I think it is absolutely inexcusable that Atlanta waited as long as it did to start Aaron Murray, given how dreadful.
They're 2-0 when he takes the majority of the snaps.
What'd you say?
Atlanta's 2-0 when Murray takes the majority of the snaps.
Yeah, the other quarterback was dreadful. The offense was unwatchable. I guess part of the issue was, one of the brief stints in which I was watching yesterday, they kept having the issue where, how if the tight end breaks out wide, the wide receiver's going to be off the line of scrimmage. They got whistled for that 3 plays in a row. It's there's a lack of crispness associated with some of this that's a little difficult.
It's a minor league football product.
But having Aaron Murray as your quarterback is absolutely the right thing to do. I thought it was amazing at the end of the game, and I don't know how many fans they had in the stands for the total of the game. But at the end of the game, all the Atlanta guys are going and giving high fives. There's this huge line of people, at least, all things being equal, comparatively speaking, huge line of folks to get Murray's autograph and give him a high five. He signed a bunch of Georgia jerseys. They had some video of this, and I saw this in the TV broadcast at the end. I'm sorry, as business plans go, there are worse ideas than creating a football team around a former Georgia quarterback that people still have great affection for. They show up. They seem really happy to see him. So the visual look at the end was really cool to see a lot of the fans, representing Murray. For me personally, haven't kind of dived into this as a fan as much as I thought that I might. But who's to say that won't one day change? There's a very good chance that it does. Don't love the Atlanta uniform. I think that's part of my problem.
I don't get the purple.
I kind of like the Memphis uniforms better, really. Steve Shaffini was very happy with Connor's opinion on the missed kick from a little bit. How about this? Listen to this. This is cool. John McMillan says, I'm first cousins with Barry Windham of the Four Horsemen. That's amazing, John. We have all these former Georgia players that watch our show, and I'm always very thrilled and honored about that. But to have Barry Windham's cousin in the comment section may be the greatest thing I've ever heard. That is an amazing piece of information. Matt Rukavina going to Alaska for his birthday.
Stay warm, Matt.
Boy, this is a cold time of year to be going to Alaska, right? Most Alaska trips I hear are like August, where it's still kind of warm. That's a challenge. Gene King is this true? Gene King is also first cousins with Ric Flair. So we've got, between Gene and John, we've got the cousins of like half the Four Horsemen. That's amazing. Gene King is first cousin. That means your parent and his parent are siblings. That's incredible. Phil Rogers doesn't believe that. Gene King asking also about Nadab Joseph. The last I heard, we don't really know where Joseph is right now, right?
I think when somebody asked Jeff on Before the Hedges a few weeks ago about it, I believe he said like Joseph's not even playing football at the moment.
I had heard that from somewhere, that as of now Joseph's not currently on a football roster, and I don't know anything beyond that. I just had heard that in some conversation at some point in time. So listen, I wish that young man well. If it's at Georgia or wherever else, I think these young men better their lives when they reconnect with football. It's one of the reasons why, and you'll hear me say this all the time, I am for second chances, third chances, fourth chances, fifth chances. You know, there are a lot of people that speak into a microphone or type into a computer. They love standing up on, some sort of ivory tower and dispensing justice and saying, this player should never play football again. He did this thing, and we got to show toughness, and we got to whatever. I am as lenient as can be when it comes to stuff like that. And I don't know that Nab Joseph did anything wrong. My point is, I'm just a big believer that football is such an avenue for making lives better, that I want there to be multiple chances. I want guys to be able to earn their way back on teams. I want academic stuff to get figured out. I don't know why we make young men's lives better by restricting them from football. So whether it be Nadab Joseph or anybody else, I hope he finds his way back to football, because at one point in time it looked like he might be able to help Georgia, but what has not changed, that football can help him, and I hope he finds it. Anzio Gibson says, this is an interesting take. And Anzio, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize. The AAF is going to be a successful league. There are no gimmicks. I've been to a game and watched 2 or 3. It's been very exciting if you love football. So that's an interesting take. I don't really know why the XFL failed the first time around. I honestly just don't remember. But I don't know that the gimmicks are necessarily what led it to fail. After all, some of the quote-unquote gimmicks of the XFL are
Skycam.
Yes, the Skycam and things like that. Those are fixtures in football now. So I'm not anti-gimmick when it comes to spring football leagues, because I do think that over the course of time, those things make football better. Now, there's no scrum to start games anymore. Mm-hmm. That's an example of an XFL gimmick that didn't work. But that that spider cam on the above the field, I mean, can you imagine watching a football game without that now? The XFL is what you have to thank for that. I think that, not having kicks, or at least not having kickoffs in the AF is to a certain extent a gimmick now, and for better or for worse, I think there's a chance that the rest of football eventually adopts that too.
They don't do extra points either.
Oh, that's right. They don't do extra points.
Right. Which I'm not a fan of. I don't like going for 2 every time.
Well, I mean, mathematically, that's what every football team should do.
It's what they should do, yes. But however, I like the aesthetic of a kicker missing a 33-yard field goal or a 33-yard extra. Matt
Rukavina mentions the fact that not a lot of people in the stands of these games. This is still a new product. You got to give it some time to establish and develop what it's going to be. One of the things that I do see on social media a lot, though, is going back to the idea of gimmicks. Some of the cool play calls, like I saw this thing the other day where it was like I won't describe it properly. It was basically like a fake reverse that turned into almost like a halfback option pass, kind of down near the goal line. It was a very innovative, cool play.
Sort of like the Philly special, but without the pitch back.
Yeah, it was a Philly special, but the quarterback didn't catch it. I think a running back threw it to like a wide receiver or something. Right. Whatever it was kind of a cool play. And I think, I'm sure that the Sunday guys are probably paying close attention to this. They're always looking for some innovative stuff like that. Richard Sheffield also brings a really good point. And this is what's really smart. He says the AAF purposely places their players near where they played college football. That's what people like me want. I mean, those of us who are big-time college football guys, even if I'm not like 100% bought into the league, the only way to get me is having Aaron Murray playing for Atlanta and having Trent Richardson playing for Birmingham, and I guess Memphis is about as close to Baton Rouge as they're going to get, having Trent, Zach Mettenberger playing there. I mean, your best chance is having those kinds of connections.
If
because
they had a Columbus, Cincinnati, if they had an Ohio team that's full of Ohio State guys.
Yeah, if they can get them out of penitentiary to be there.
Wow. Come on now, VA.
Sorry, it's late in the show. That's the best.
You don't need to be taking. Look, Ohio State hasn't scored a point in a college football playoff game in almost 4 years. You don't need to be taking shots at them like that.
Well, listen, that's the best I got. Sometimes at the end it kind of gets a little punchy. We got to get ready to get out of here. So to Top fans and everybody else, thanks for being with us as part of the program today. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, who views all Georgia fans as top fans, and make sure you check them out. Heating and air, plumbing, electrical, they will take good care of you. rsandrews.com on the web. Dari's a good guy. You'll like all the staff there. When they show up to your house, you're going to feel very comfortable letting them through that door. The stuff they tell you, the stuff they do, you're going to feel good about that. The price, not going to be a surprise. It's going to be everything like you expect it to be. So check them out online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow.